vegan nutrient deficiencies that destroy your vital organs. Let's open our video series in which we will be discussing absolutely essential, conditionally essential, and non-strictly essential nutrients that are synthesized by the body in insufficient amounts that are currently recognized and studied by the nutritional science that are completely unavailable on a vegan diet, practically unavailable on a vegan diet, and unreliably available on a vegan diet. By vegan diet, I mean a diet consisting of whole foods from the plant kingdom, including foods with low or limited toxicity, such as legumes or grains that were thoroughly cooked, that were not augmented or processed in the lab to produce synthetic isolates and concentrates, unless I specify otherwise in the relevant chapters. Other definitions that I would like to introduce. An essential nutrient is a vital nutrient that the body can receive only with food. The body cannot synthesize this nutrient, or it produces it in terribly negligible amounts. Second definition is conditionally essential nutrient. Represents a vital nutrient that, depending on the individual characteristics of a human or environmental conditions, may be essential. The third definition is non-essential but insufficiently produced nutrient. Represents vital nutrient that is produced by the body in the amounts necessary for survival, but not optimal for sustaining long-term health. Now, for clarity, let's go through the nutrient availability classification that I introduced. First group of nutrients, completely unavailable, means that plants simply do not contain this nutrient. Second category of nutrients is practically unavailable. Plants do contain this nutrient in principle, but either in nutritionally irrelevant amounts or in non-bioavailable form or non-accessible form. And category number 3 is unreliably available nutrients. Plants do contain this nutrient, but in small quantities or with significantly limited bioavailability or metabolic availability, providing as a result insufficient amounts of this nutrient to fulfill daily needs with an adequate amount of food. Also, when the food source containing this nutrient is not widely or easily accessible to people and cannot be a daily food item due to its other properties and health effects. A good example here would be sauerkraut. If we eat it as a source of vitamin K2, we cannot eat as much of sauerkraut to fulfill our vitamin K2 needs because sauerkraut is incredibly acidic. It contains a lot of lactic acid, which makes our teeth erode. It's also bloating promoting food, so we cannot eat enough sauerkraut to fulfill our vitamin K2 needs. So this is a good example of unreliably available source of nutrition. And here in the table, you can see all the nutrients of concern being summarized and classified based on their availability from food and based on their grade of how essential they are. And as you can see, the class of completely unavailable nutrients is left empty because indeed plants do contain all nutrients there are, including vitamins, minerals, including all essential amino acids, including all fatty acids, including, of course, the precursors for our body to make non-essential nutrients. The mere role of plants in the ecosystem and the food chain is to convert inorganic matter into organic molecules and gases necessary for respiration of all aerobic bacteria and animals. And in symbiosis with bacteria, plants create a complete set of nutrients that are recycled within the biosphere. However, the argument that this proves the suitability and sustainability of a vegan diet for humans is rather naive and limited. Ranging from the naturally limited extraction rate of nutrients from plants by the compact human digestive system to the food preparation practices that cause oxidation and thermal degradation, damage of the essential amino acids, destruction of vitamins, augmentation of mineral-containing complexes and fats, multiple correction factors, multiple correction coefficients must be introduced after we calculate and assume the total content of nutrients contained in plants. Because what we can isolate from the raw plants via certain extraction methods, certain chemical isolation extraction methods, does not equate to what our body can extract from the plant matter upon digestion. We need to be very aware of all of those correction factors such that we can accurately estimate how much we can actually practically utilize from the plants. And when it comes to the internal synthesis of non-essential nutrients, we should clearly understand that those chemical reactions don't just happen in the ether. They require actual material chemical precursors, molecules, as well as they require the chemicals that will create the environment for the reactions to occur, which involve certain enzymes, proteins, certain codes that are necessary for building molecules. They require certain ions, certain vitamins to sustain proper pH, proper supply of certain ions to stabilize and sustain chemical reactions of synthesis of non-essential nutrients. So we also need to be aware of that, and we need to make sure that we supply necessary precursors for non-essential nutrients to be produced. In addition to all the above mentioned factors, we need to be aware that nutritional needs vary depending on the stage of life. As we're going through the life cycle, starting from conception to infancy to childhood to puberty to adolescence to maturity and reproductive age, when all our biology is serving the purpose of leaving the offspring, producing high quality offspring. Another stage of life here is pregnancy and lactation that we need to take into account. Then to transitioning to middle age, to further hormonal changes and seniority. In each of these stages, we will have as priorities development and differentiation of the vital functions, then growth, then regeneration, then repair, and all with ever-changing hormonal status. At each of these stages, both nutritional needs and resilience against malnutrition will vary. Moreover, an individual genetic makeup can put some people at risk of not producing sufficient amounts of non-essential nutrients. So those people will need to consume more of certain foods to make up for their inability to produce adequate amounts of certain vital nutrients. And this will be necessary for those people to sustain a long-term health. All of these factors that I just qualitatively mentioned, all of these alone, make it fundamentally unethical to promote vegan diet for everyone at every stage of life as sufficient. And we will look deeper into this issue by going nutrient by nutrient, looking into what goes into each of those nutrients, why they're vital, and what are the differences across the population may require higher consumption of certain nutrients. Let's open our discussion, our nutrient breakdown, with the most trivial nutrient that is not available in vegan diet, B12, that everybody is aware of. So let's get it out of the way, basically, and it also will open up the series of nutrients that are involved in the methylation cycles. So B12, I classified it as practically unavailable because technically we can, in theory, source it from certain kinds of seaweed such as nori, or we can get it from the microalgae such as chlorella. It's still not a plant synthesized vitamin. It is a product of symbiotic bacteria that produce it, but practically speaking, it can be found in the plants, in the plant matter. However, availability of B12 from seaweeds is arguable, and also the content of B12 varies drastically. There are several conflicting papers on the issue. In particular, it was demonstrated that the mere drying process of nori seaweed, completely eliminates all B12. With that in mind, nori cannot be considered a reliable source of B12 for vegans. If we think about vegan diet, so food, dietary sources of nutrition, chlorella in turn is a very costly, poorly regulated, poorly researched substance that is imported from the countries in which there is very bad quality control, potentially. You will never know. It is barely possible to find a reliable supplier of chlorella with full transparency, with all certification, and also with the guarantee of the B12 content. And typically, nutritional value of chlorella grown in purified water basins, usually it's very poor. So chlorella kind of needs to be grown in some form of like pollution, such that it becomes nutritionally relevant, nutritionally prominent. So it is a very, very questionable substance, and it is totally up to you if you want to take a risk. But just be aware that none of the plant sources of B12 are reliable, because not only the bioavailability of B12 from those substances is guaranteed, because you need to break down complex polysaccharide molecules for which we do not have any enzymes for. Moreover, it's not guaranteed that there is even any B12 to begin with. Another important consideration is that depending on where the seaweed was harvested, in particular in southern Chinese pools, where all those seaweeds are usually grown, if you source seaweed from different basins, you will have a different ratio of actual bioavailable B12 and so-called like fake pseudo B12 that will just sit on the receptors or on transport proteins and will gradually rid you of B12 by doing so. Because again, this unusable B12 from like the ones found in spirulina predominantly or in some fractions in nori sheets will hinder absorption of usable B12, so normal B12 won't be delivered to mitochondria, to the cells. If we think about the speculation of internal synthesis, then internally synthesized B12, first of all, bacteria produce it for themselves. So they produce it and they use it for their own metabolism. Moreover, this internally synthesized B12 is produced downstream from where it can be absorbed, so it will just get eliminated with feces. You will not get any of that. It is not something to rely on. Then, in terms of the supplementation, in terms of different types of B12, while some differences exist between different forms of cobalamins, pretty much any form of B12 will act the same in the body. There is no practical difference, but diligent supplementation with synthetic forms of B12 is essential for anyone who tries to be a vegan, who tries to be on a vegan diet. Supplementation with B12 is usually also an effective measure for people with low intrinsic factor. There is a low fraction of population that suffers from this condition, so they're not able to metabolize vitamin B12 normally through the digestive tract, so for those people, injectable or sublingual forms of B12 are preferred. I will attach the paper on B12, its different forms and different nuances in how they're being processed by the body, and also all the mechanics of actually conversion of B12 from the forms that it's delivered in into the usable B12 in the attachment, so in the description below. Important thing here to be aware of is that conversion of supplied adenosylcobalamin, methylcobalamin, hydroxycobalamin, cyanocobalamin into the usable adenosine-cobalamin and methylcobalamin inside of the mitochondria inside of the cell largely relies on supply of folate, which is a relatively easy to get nutrient. If we think of vegan diet specifically, it is easy to get from fruits, so folate we can get from fruits, but it also relies on supply of methionine, choline, betaine, as well as adenosyl groups that are derived from the ATP. And the production of ATP molecules relies on supply of oxygen, hence on supply of iron, such that we can produce hemoglobin and deliver oxygen into the cells. Also, we need good quality red blood cells, so all of the components that contribute into development of anemia, they must be taken into account and taken care of. And also, formation of hemoglobin relies on some other nutrients that we'll discuss later in this cycle. It is not just about the iron, if you are aware of the construction of the hemoglobin molecule. So let's briefly go through what B12 deficiency can lead to. I'll just read it off the list here. So first, of course, is anemia, so lack of oxygen and cellular energy necessary to fuel up all synthetic reactions happening in the body. Second thing, it's of course neurological disorders, nervous system disorders, tingling, pins and needles, muscle weakness, numbness, incontinence, coordination and balance issues. Then third set of symptoms is related to psychiatry. So it is depression, memory loss, irritability, and personality disorders can occur as a result of B12 deficiency. Then damage to skin and mucosa, discoloration of knees, elbows, and knuckles, ulcers on the gums or tongue. Then there can be chronic nausea. there can be decreased or lost appetite, then weight loss, possibly as a result, and increased heart rate. And here it is important to note that having low B12 will make it impossible to reverse anemia that is caused by other factors compounding to the B12 deficiency, and vice versa. Anemia is a complex issue that requires a comprehensive approach. It requires proper nutrition in general, not just B12 pill. So monitoring all iron markers, folate, protein, along with B12 and homocysteine is really important if you are on a vegan diet specifically. And so this makes it a good spot to move on to another nutrient. It is methionine. Methionine is an essential amino acid that I classified as unreliably available on a vegan diet, along with lysine, by the way. So there will be some crosstalk in my discussion on methionine. I will mention lysine in certain contexts, you will see. So methionine and cysteine are sulfur-containing essential amino acids, and they are of course necessary for protein synthesis, and they play some other important roles as well. We'll discuss them shortly. So back in the day when I was listening to vegan MDs, when I was listening to their lectures, building my awareness about vegan nutrition, learning about risks and benefits of the vegan diet, I was under impression that methionine is such an amino acid, such a questionable thing that is linked to multiple chronic diseases, risk of cancer. I was under impression that it is a really great idea to follow a path of methionine restriction. And methionine restriction becomes a natural way of advertising vegan diet, since it is naturally methionine restricted. And yes, it's used for promotion of vegan diet along with cholesterol and saturated fat claims, which I find completely unethical because it doesn't deliver the full picture. Methionine restriction is indeed beneficial for a very limited category of cancer patients, patients with suppressed immunity, with compromised immune system. And in contrary, methionine restriction promotes growth and proliferation of tumors in patients with normally functioning immune system, because methionine restriction suppresses anti-tumor immunity, and methionine in turn acts as amino acid supporting anti-tumor defense cells. Methionine is required for protein synthesis and for internal synthesis of creatine and carnitine. So its long-term restriction may lead to a whole variety of serious disorders. Childhood is the time of critical need for methionine because it's a developmental stage of a human, the unique developmental period. Due to cysteine-sparing effects, the daily requirement for methionine may vary depending on what source of methionine you are using. It can vary from anywhere from 7 milligrams per kilogram per day to 17 milligrams per kilogram per day, depending on the ratio of methionine to cysteine in the food sources. And now let's look at some consequences of prolonged methionine restriction. If you are chronically undersupplying methionine with your diet, you may develop bone loss, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. You can run into reduction of hair color due to buildup of hydrogen peroxide in the hair follicles that effectively bleaches the hair pigment. So the hair will be gray rather than having your natural hair color. You may have reduced glutathione production, and this compound is necessary for detoxification and for cellular protection. You may slow down DNA and protein synthesis, hence you will cause reduction in regeneration of your body tissues, and you should bear in mind that our body constantly regenerates. We constantly destroy cells and build new ones, and you may also hinder the enzyme production, because enzymes are also proteins. You may have all consequences of thus reduced production of cysteine, creatine, and 35% of all dietary methionine goes to production of creatine, taurine, lecithin, and so whatever symptoms come with that, we will also be discussing it later. And then in children and infants, methionine restriction leads to hair discoloration. It becomes faded. Children may have skin issues. And then also methionine restriction in children may lead to permanent changes in gene expression. So it may have unexpected outcomes later in life, so down the road, even if nutritional deprivation is removed. And of course, in children, all consequences of decreased protein supply, protein synthesis may manifest as well. So it's a very costly experiment to run on children. Then also gut wall and gut lining degradation may follow. Also So if there are some complementary deficiencies, lack of dietary methionine may lead to elevated homocysteine, and that can lead to osteoporosis, atherosclerosis, so blood vessel damage, and collagen loss, because elevated homocysteine causes cross-linking, like negative cross-linking, and increase of fragility of the collagen fibers. So B12, B9, B6, choline, and methionine, they all must be balanced through nutrition. Then something to note here is that high methionine is indeed linked to prostate cancer risk increase. However, at the same time, high methionine consumption is linked to reduction in the colon cancer risk. So there is this interesting relationship to look into. Can we get methionine from plants? Absolutely. So why am I bringing it up here as a point of concern? Methionine and lysine are two limiting amino acids in plant foods. Besides, these two amino acids are most prone to oxidation and thermal damage. So they become significantly less bioavailable when exposed to air and when they are being heated up, or even when they are subjected to pressure. In an example of peas, so some legume, bioavailability of lysine reduces from 89% to 55% upon cooking. And if we think about protein isolates from plant sources, then if we compare the base bioavailability of methionine from soy protein as opposed to casein protein, bioavailability of methionine from soy protein is 71% and 89% from casein powder. So there is a considerable difference in the bioavailability after we already take into account the reduced content of methionine in plant foods compared to animal sources. From one paper I found that was studying various plant protein powders and comparing them to animal protein powders, they estimate something that you need to consume 3 to 8 times more plant protein to account for amino acid insufficiency in the plant protein compared to the animal protein. So this is a kind of extreme number. The conclusion that was suggested in this paper was that it is reasonable to mix, at least make 50-50 blends of plant proteins and animal proteins if you worry about some environmental factors and whatnot, which are also pretty questionable, but this is where the funding is, so I guess scientists are very compelled to push this agenda that we need to maximize cultured crop consumption. So in case of relying on plant protein only, we need to be aware of the following things. Again, if you want to get all of your protein exclusively from whole plant food sources, first thing that you need to keep in mind is that amino acids and other nutrients are contained largely within indigestible fiber matrix. You do not have any digestive juices, any gastric juices or enzymes to break down insoluble fiber inside of your stomach or small intestine. Indeed, your bacteria can use insoluble fiber as source of nutrition to produce certain amino acids, certain fatty acids for your and bacteria's own benefit, potentially. However, what it does is that all nutrients are locked inside of some insoluble matrix, and only the small fraction of those nutrients mechanistically can be subjected to your digestive juices and to the surfaces of absorption. So, if imagine you swallow an insoluble sponge saturated with different nutrition. Yes, there is some diffusion gradient, but you're swallowing this solid blob filled with nutrients. Partially, you cannot break them down. Partially, they come in contact with the intestinal wall, the organ, the part where absorption of most nutrients happen. And only this stuff that comes in immediate contact with your gut wall can get absorbed by your body. Nothing else will. So there is the first tier of limitation of how much nutrition you can get from plant matter. It is mechanistic limitation. If you do not know what fraction of nutrients you absorb from whole plant foods, if you do not have a number, better find it out, because this is something that you need to factor in your chronometer readings, because whatever you find on any nutritional tracker app tells you the amount of nutrition that is contained in this plant in its whole form if we were to isolate the nutrient. Exception is probably vitamin A, because this well studied 2 different forms, we will talk about it later. But for the most part, how much are you getting? How much are you extracting from all this cellulose, from all this fiber? This explains partially why fiber is so well used for lowering cholesterol, lowering estrogen, because it helps to flush things out without being absorbed. That's all. It just prevents it from coming in contact with the intestinal wall, because our intestinal wall is expecting liquid matter that is fully homogenized with bile, with pancreatic juices. So this is what our digestive system is expecting to absorb nutrients from. Then the second tier of bioavailability limitation comes from phytates. Phytates form insoluble complexes with minerals, with nutrients, and thus inhibiting the absorption of proteins as well. When it comes to getting amino acids from plants, lysine, methionine, you are adding extra limitation there because those are usually bound to phytates. Phytates significantly hinder absorption of proteins and minerals as well. Do you factor this in when you calculate how much protein you're getting? In this regard, there is some wisdom in fruitarianism because fruits carry the most bioavailable plant nutrition there is. However, so-called normal vegan diet relies on foods that are extremely high in phytic acid for getting protein. Same story happens with lectin-rich foods. Lectins, that's a huge category of proteins that some of them we have genetic adaptations to break them down or to not flare up in response to lectins. However, most grains and legumes, they contain lectins that not only damage our gut, but also are insoluble, non-digestible proteins. So we cannot effectively extract the amino acids from the lectin proteins. And then on the other hand, lectins damage the gut, so they gradually lead to having leaky gut syndrome, which further reduces our ability to normally digest, absorb nutrients from food, in addition to everything else. As I mentioned, thermal treatment of plant matter also reduces bioavailability of amino acids by 50% or so, which means that boiled to death foods on a vegan diet, they also are a poor source of amino acids, specifically the limiting amino acids, lysine and methionine. And when we think about raw veganism, there is wisdom in raw vegan diet because actually you are getting amino acids that were not thermally augmented. So proponents of so-called normal vegan diet, think about this aspect. And then fifth factor is that anything that underwent the Maillard reaction, so anything browned from being fried, will also have reduced bioavailability of amino acids. So such sources as granolas, cereals, crispy rice, whatever it is, like whatever dishes there are, then deep fried tofu will have further lowered amino acid bioavailability. Do you know the correction factors? Your chronometer doesn't tell you any of that. And interestingly, methionine deficiency is something that may not be only relevant for vegans, but also for omnivore animals that eat man-made feed, consisting of corn and soy. So if we think about pigs and chickens, actually there are plenty of studies addressing the issue of methionine deficiency in the feed of those animals. So which makes it really interesting because humans are also omnivores, and there are vegan MDs that prescribe humans the diet that is deficient for other omnivore animals, and it is a prominent issue. So it is kind of comedic. I think food engineers are working on this problem as well when they are designing some man-made food, not something that those animals would eat naturally, such that they can raise healthy animals. Now I would like to read something that I found in HealthLine. So in terms of methionine status, the highest content, 6.8 grams per day, was reported in high-protein diets, while lower intakes were present for lacto-ovo-vegetarians, 3 grams per day, and vegans, 2.3 grams per day. Despite the low intake among vegetarians, other research has shown that they actually have higher blood concentrations of methionine than those who eat meat and fish. This finding led the researchers to conclude that dietary content and blood concentrations of methionine are not always directly related. However, these studies did find that vegans have both low dietary intake and low blood concentrations of methionine. End of quote. Unfortunately, addressing methionine deficiency or insufficiency, whichever you prefer, through strictly dietary means on a vegan diet may be challenging for many people. It may be especially difficult for kids, as their demands for methionine may be higher than that for the adults, because it is a critical essential nutrient for a developing organism. And the problem is that children are usually not keen on consuming large amounts of food. And in general, it is abnormal for people with healthy psyche without any psychiatric disorders to overeat, to stuff themselves with food, which becomes inevitable if you want to hit all nutritional goals on a vegan diet. So with children, it becomes especially prominent because normal children, I've never met a child who would want to stuff themselves with certain foods. Children are usually more eager to go run and do their stuff. So it is important, in my opinion, from what I've studied, to feed children high-density nutrition. High-density, high-quality nutrition, as opposed to very dilute, very low bioavailability foods. So it might be a good idea if you want to run vegan experiment on your children to supplement with protein powder. Not even that. I would word it in the following way. It is best to give your children the foundation of nutrition, perhaps in the form of isolated powders, which moves us away from the concept of diet to begin with, because it's a supplement territory. It's not food, it's supplements, medications effectively. So, and then for your aesthetical pleasure, if you're a vegan parent who wants their child to be vegan, for your personal aesthetical pleasure, you can feed them after some period of time. You can feed them all those vegan foods that you regard as peak healthfulness, such that the nutrient blockers don't act negatively on the concentrated nutrient powders that you envision to be a good source of nutrition for your child. But it is important to monitor protein consumption in your children very, very meticulously, because you can be setting your child up not just for delayed development, physical development, some stunted growth, poor muscle development, but also for some delayed genetic expressions that may be unwanted. So be careful about that, be very mindful about that. And if you notice any symptoms, any signals that your child may be developing abnormally, it may be a worthy thing to reconsider your style of nutrition that you offer to your child. Again, over a short period of time, methionine restriction does not necessarily lead to any deterioration of health, but it is when it happens over a prolonged period of time, like several months, then nutritional deprivation, including methionine, also let's append lysine here probably, may result in certain damage that may be both reversible or irreversible. To complete the methylation group, now let's talk about the most probably important, the most prominent nutritional issue associated with vegan diet, choline. I would probably name choline as the major culprit with vegan diet. Choline is considered to be an essential nutrient, even though it is being produced by our liver in some small amounts as a backup reserve. So it is a purely survival adaptation for the times of extreme crisis. In the modern days, most people appear to be deficient in choline, likely owing to the propaganda of plant-based nutrition and also cholesterol fears, as the main sources of choline are eggs, poultry, and organ meats. In fact, only 11% of Americans hit their choline goal. Moreover, there is this interesting factor in play that over 50% of the world population has genetic modifications that make them require even more choline than is currently established as the daily norm. The current recommended intake of choline for women is 425 milligrams per day. For males, it's 550 milligrams per day. For pregnant and lactating women, these numbers become 450 milligrams per day and 550 milligrams per day, respectively. And for the infants, this daily dose must be recalculated to make it 8 times higher per kilogram of body weight than that of an adult. So those numbers, 550 milligrams per day for males, accounts for 70 kilograms of body mass. Vegan MDs associate choline with negative health outcomes, again motivating the appropriateness of vegan diet that is naturally low in choline. However, as with methionine, they are not so eager to talk or even highlight the essential role of choline and the hazards of developing choline deficiency. To get get enough choline, you need to eat and fully break down and metabolize one of the following foods or partial combinations of the following foods. You would need to consume 2.5 cups of soy flour per day, 20 tablespoons of roasted wheat germ, 4 cups of uncooked quinoa. This is toxin right away. That is not digestible. Quinoa is just not digestible food. Anyway, I don't consider it to be food. I think it's a torture. Then you would need to eat 15 cups of broccoli or 1 pound of almonds or other nuts. So you can mix and match to get the full dose of choline per day, again considering that you would break those foods down, which is arguable because again all nutrients are locked in the inside of the fibrous and digestible matter, and also there are some nutrient absorption blockers, and some foods are not possible to consume in large amounts to begin with, such as nuts. I mean, we can eat safely, we can comfortably eat a handful of nuts per day. More is already kind of on the heavier side, and plus also those plant foods, they are often associated with adverse effects, so need to be mindful about that. And also digestive system of most people won't be able to handle sufficient amounts of plant matter, won't be able just even consume it. And I don't know, like I personally can't eat soy. It's highly inflammatory for me. I can't eat quinoa. I mean, 4 cups is now, it's uncooked, so it would expand 3 times or 4 times, so it's an overkill. Wheat germ too. I mean, wheat germ contains indigestible protein gluten, so why eat it? It's arguable that it will get digested properly. And then again, nuts, nut butters, probably one of the most adequate here. Adding bioavailability correction factor to this list, these dosages might be multiplied by anywhere from like 2 to 20, depending on your individual characteristics and on the method of preparation of those food items. Again, quinoa is non-digestible, and it is one of the hardest grains for gut sensitivity. Broccoli is highly fibrous and it's very sulfuric, so it's a strong irritant, and it also has some people with certain hormonal issues shouldn't eat so much of cruciferous vegetables or eat them altogether. Plus also cruciferous vegetables block absorption of vitamin B6. This will be later in this block of videos. Then soy is also a major gut irritant. It has a bunch of biochemical effects, but perhaps soy is actually one of the most viable vegan sources of choline. And realistic dosage of nuts per day is probably 40 grams or so. Yeah, a full dose of choline from animal foods can be achieved from one of the following or partial combinations of 150 grams or 6 ounces of chicken liver, which one liver weighs approximately from 30 to 50 grams. Sometimes they're smaller, sometimes they're bigger. So just like 3-4 chicken livers is easily accessible. Then 4 eggs or 9 ounces of salmon. So some salmon steak can give you this amount. Eggs are incredibly easy to include in the diet. And plus also in combination with other foods, you can reduce the dosages and just accrue the necessary choline amounts from other foods. In particular, I was undersupplying choline because I cannot eat soy. I was eating a lot of nuts, I was eating a lot of seeds. My choline was under 30% daily dose. It was actually pretty dangerous, and now we'll be discussing why. Basically, choline is used to build cell membranes. About 50% of choline that we consume goes to build the membranes. It is essential for brain development in fetus, which makes pregnant and lactating women at risk of choline deficiency if they don't get enough from the diet, because actually the baby's body prioritizes sucking choline from the mother's body. It is a priority nutrient during the stages of active development, just like folate, and even in one of the articles, I saw that choline was considered more important than folate, but who talks about it? No one. Because we need to push what? We need to push plant-based agenda. A sustained choline deficiency can lead to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and liver damage. It may start developing just within the first couple of months of choline deprivation. And not just like going from 100% RDV of choline to 0. No, from slight choline deprivation. Atherosclerosis may be also caused by choline deficiency. In case of hyperhomocysteinemia, if choline deficiency is accompanied with complementary deficiencies of B12 and folate and also B6. Then neurological disorders, muscle damage, cell fragility that translates to the overall tissues, Maybe this is the secret to the appearance of vegans as very fragile. Then osteoporosis, and here I have a specific number. Interestingly, receiving less than 232 milligrams of choline per day is a reliable predictor of osteoporosis. So, see how much you're getting. Then in pregnancy, choline deficiency can increase the risk of preeclampsia, prematurity, low birth weight. It is a marker of pregnancy complications and adverse pregnancy outcomes. Choline is more important in pregnancy than folate, as it can result in neural tube defects, same as with folate deficiency, delayed memory problems in a child. So basically later in child's life, there can be memory issues because they were not getting enough choline while the mother was pregnant, lactating, and as developing infant. Then permanent reduction in cognitive abilities in children in case of early life choline deprivation. So vegan mothers, again, if you're experimenting on your children, putting them on a vegan diet, pay attention to this nutrient. If you want to risk it all and go on vegan pregnancy, if you want to go in lactation on a vegan diet, if you want to make your child a vegan since birth, please pay attention to the choline intake. Then, choline restriction in general can be associated with DNA damage. Then, another fact is high dietary intake of choline was associated with 24% lower risk of breast cancer in women. High dietary intake of choline was associated with lower inflammation markers. And then there is interesting equation that I saw because there is a claim that choline deficiency or insufficiency can be compensated with folate. I think supports veganism because vegan diet is naturally high in folate. Found this nice equation that getting enough folate, enough methionine, but getting inadequate amount of choline results in fatty liver and muscle damage, both being reversed by restoring normal supply of choline. It is not correct to appeal to the compensatory effects of folate overdose on a vegan diet because even with high amount of folate, still not supplying enough choline poses risk to health. What are the other roles of choline? Besides participating in the methylation cycle, choline is converted into lecithin. It is needed for brain function and cholesterol regulation. It is converted in acetylcholine. It helps in muscle contractions. It activates pain responses, and it is needed for memory and cognition. It is also getting converted into betaine that also participates in methylation as a methyl group donor, and it also helps to concentrate urine in the kidneys. In fact, lots of observed symptoms of vegan deterioration may be easily linked to choline deficiency. So regular testing for choline or supplementation may be essential if it is principal for you to not eat animal foods. However, it is of prime importance for pregnant and lactating women, for parents, to pay attention to this nutrient and to possibly not run vegan experiments on the children, because choline deficiency may have both almost immediate effects and also delayed effects when your child already becomes an adult. And you will be inducing that. And that is easily avoidable. In general, interfering in the methylation reactions by introducing highly likely nutritional deficiencies by forcing a vegan diet on children is a very, very, very questionable idea. And I'm using this soft language just out of self-censorship. Unlike adults, children cannot be forced to gulp certain non-palatable foods, or not even foods but substances. And they cannot overeat, unlike mentally ill people who go on vegan diets and get an immense happiness from being able to overeat without gaining weight. But at the same time, overeating is necessary to at least come closer to nutritional goals on a vegan diet. The volume of vegan food is vast, but the actual nutritional value adjusted by bioavailability is very poor compared to the animal-based nutrition. It is unnatural for people with healthy psyche and for children to stuff themselves with food. And in that case, reading the diet of concentrated, highly bioavailable food and whole food groups poses a risk of malnutrition, which is incredibly dangerous when the body's vital functions are being formed and developed. for the person to be able to achieve their peak performance, their genetic limit, and realize everything they would want to realize in life. And next thing also related to methionine is creatine, that we'll discuss in the part number 2.